think that takes those people who have that intersectionality, like you, as you know, because you were a star on the first episode of it, was Innovation Squared, which we did during COVID, funded by Amgen. And it was this idea that people who work on a molecular level don't often get to talk with people who are working on innovation on an external, more engineering-driven level. And that during COVID, we were in these Zoom calls running through agenda where we would just be hitting things off and taking things off a list of things to do, and then jumping on another Zoom call and running through another agenda. But what we were missing were those in-between moments where we met people outside of our direct circle of influence or our direct team. Right. And with our direct team, we are of like minds to some extent in the work, and we don't know what we don't know. And we're working towards innovation, but it's probably incremental. But if we're forced to have a conversation with someone, even within the same company, who works in a different section, but certainly with people outside, like if you're talking to relatives, etc., when you're talking about what you do as in terms of research, you have to do it to talk about it in a way that's relatable.
This episode's guest is Elliot Kotek. I am so excited to introduce Elliot to everyone on this podcast. Elliot is a longtime friend of mine. He's an Aussie. He's an innovator. And the reason I wanted to chat with Elliot is I genuinely have never met a person who has caused disruption and innovation in so many different fields as Elliot. Elliot continues to go down in history as one of the people that I want to be when I grow up. And so I really wanted to bring him onto the podcast to chat about his incredible career, the projects that he's been involved in, and his personal philosophy around creating innovation wherever he goes. One of the things that people should be able to take away from this incredibly informative episode is how much of innovation is truly a repeatable process. You know, Elliot will talk us through mantras that he has and philosophies that he has that really show you that you can operationalize innovation, and that when your heart is in the right place and when your need and desire for impact is in the right place, innovation becomes very, very easy.
This is Disrupting Innovation with Dr. David Petrino.
So welcome to Disrupting Innovation. This is a podcast that is all about trying to answer the question of why does healthcare innovation take so long? So why are there cures out there that could be helping people? Why are there innovations that we heard about flash in a pan and then they never went anywhere? What can we be doing to speed these things along? I'm really excited to have you on because I feel as though your career has spanned so many different verticals and you've seen so many different things. I'm also, incredibly proud to have worked with you on a bunch of projects. But I also want to dig into some of those projects fairly critically because I feel as though a lot of the projects that I get involved in, they're amazing at face value, but then what's the overall impact? What did they change? These are the sort of self-effacing questions that I ask myself, especially for a project that doesn't completely disrupt a way of doing something. So that's really what we're about today, and I'm really thrilled to have you on. I can never keep up with all the things you're doing, and so I think it's easier for everyone if you just explain yourself to everyone and all the things that you do.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about the question coming from you is that it applies equally to you. I have a company here in Los Angeles, based in Los Angeles, called The Nation of Artists, but most of our work takes us all around the world. A lot, and it's really about, storytelling's become a bit of a cliche word even by itself, so I don't even like using it anymore. But we create content and campaigns that move the needle. Our North Star is impact. We are driven by a formula that ideas plus empathy equal impact, on both sides of the camera. That the way we work and the way we bring people together to collaborate, and the way we respect those people, hopefully, and definitely intentionally, is to provide as much empathy to where people are coming from and where they stand, as well as recognizing that empathy alone doesn't get us there. If we're sitting on a couch holding someone's hand, or crying alongside them and feeling all the things that they feel, it's good to acknowledge that, but at some point you also need to put things in frameworks and ideas in place to move us forward, and move them forward, in order to have an impact in that scenario. And so we try and make sure that we've got that combination of ideas and empathy at all time. And likewise, I don't think ideas apply, and some of this may apply to some of the projects that we have worked on together in the past, but some of the ideas that might be brilliant, if they lack a certain type of empathy, also don't have lasting impact. They might have an intentionality that's good, that's not malicious. They might have messaging that's fantastic and potentially inspiring. But if there's not enough listening going on or intentionality behind the empathy part of it, then maybe they're not as successful as they could be. So for us, that means anything. Like in terms of content, like I know that some people produce documentaries, other people produce advertising. We like to use brand money wherever we can, but not always. We like to work with nonprofits, but not always. And it can look like a 2-minute anthem video, a 15-second blurb, or a slogan for a festival. But it goes all the way through documentary series, feature documentaries, virtual reality programming. Basically, we ask the question of, what do we want the result to be? Is it behavioral change? Is it awareness? And what do we need to create in order to reach the people that something needs to reach, and involve the people that need to be involved?
Amazing. Well, what an intro. And I think what we're like 4 minutes in, and already I think that first the first insight that I would hope that people listening would hear has come, which is ideas plus empathy equals impact. I think that motto can be applied across the board. Like, this is my biggest issue with science, is that I work with scientists often who are good scientists, they're good people, but they just want to answer their small question. And so for the sake of an NIH grant that they're writing, or for the sake of, whoever they're trying to impress on a funding line, they'll say, one day this discovery will help people with spinal cord injury or traumatic brain injury or stroke or long COVID. But really they just want to answer that incremental question. So it's an idea without empathy. And we see very little impact from it, because what their idea of impact is publishing a paper in a good journal.
I guess, and you can probably speak to this, or I'm sure you can speak to this, is that idea of how we incentivize novelty, how we incentivize research, etc. A lot of times that's what people are chasing, because that's the system that they know and are familiar with, right? That's how they get their rewards. That's how they get recognition internally. And so the incentives can be broader. And I think people just need to be aware that sometimes getting recognition outside your field can put pressure on your field to recognize you more immediately.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think when you're boxed into a system, it's very easy to, it's the lowest effort thing to do, is to work out the metrics and then just excel at those metrics whilst completely forgetting the mission, and sometimes that's what I bang my head against the wall with in the work that I do, is we work in a hospital. So our mission should be pretty clear. But sometimes it doesn't feel that way because of all of the metrics of success that you're told are important. And it's not even the dollar amount that you're bringing in. Sometimes it's who's giving you that dollar amount, that is the most important thing, which can feel very counterproductive to mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having this discussion around metrics on my projects the other day, and I have like almost like a Harry Potter love child anagram. It's Malco. It's not. It's not
That does sound very Harry Potter. Yep.
yeah. It's definitely the offspring of some Harry Potter characters or something. But Malco for me is the metrics. There's usually like the data metrics, right? Is what people usually talk about. Is like how many eyeballs, what's the percentages? Give us the statistics. In my world, that also applies to awards. How many awards did it get? What kind of awards? Where did they come from? But then I like to also look at these other components of like the ALCO that come on the back of that, which is what's the accessibility and availability of the content and the things potentially inside the content that you're bringing awareness to. What's the longevity on the project, for how long? Because I also feel that if something is new to you, then it's new. Whereas a lot of content and campaigns, they come out for very short blasts of time. And I think that it's worth looking at what the ultimate longevity is for a project in order to reach the people that you need to reach. Sometimes, like with fashion, something needs to get all the way through from the fashion houses to the targets, right? And that's, to me, very apt, because it needs to go from the innovators and the idea makers all the way through to the potential beneficiaries. Just as there's a lot of effort spent in making people aware of options for them via advertising in the healthcare system, which is like a big criticism of big pharma as a general rule. We need to educate people about these other innovations that are happening so that they can reach their level, so that they have understanding of it, so their demand can be bottom up as well as top down. And then C is the conversations that it generates. What conversations does your program or your programming generate? And what does that mean for the next time someone hears that idea, right? The first time you hear an idea, it might be a little bit crazy, but it gives you the seed of something. So the next time you hear it, you might be more open to funding that idea, that lab, that research, etc., because it's not the first time you're hearing it. So it's not as out there as you thought it was maybe the first time. And you've also changed as a person and read different things and had different experiences in the interim. And then the O is the opportunities, like what opportunities were generated, what ideas did it spark in some young kid's head or in the family member of someone going through something. And for them, that can be life-changing for them and the people around them. And so that's my little Malco metric, Harry Potter metric system.
Harry Potter metric.
Yeah,
I like it.
HPM.
Okay, so we've already had at least 2 or 3 insights here, and now a Harry Potter metric, which is
that's right.
amazing. I mean, I feel the scientist in me has to ask, that is an incredible metric. It sounds tricky to measure. Is it tricky to measure, or do you just have targeted impact and evaluation plans for everything that you do focused around that rubric?
Yeah, well, I mean, parts of it are easy to measure, right? So the metrics part, awards, eyeballs, those sorts of things. I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, they're problematic measuring systems, right? Nielsen, obviously problematic, but has been in existence for decades. Media impressions, problematic, but has been in existence for advertisers for decades. CPM and other kind of metrics for how we pay people for impressions online. YouTube has its own views metric. Facebook has a different views metric. So all those metrics are pretty easy to define. They just have to be a common playing field. And then the other metrics are also kind of easy to define. They just need to be captured, right? Like you know how long something stayed in the marketplace. You can affect it by having that content also play at like film festivals and other things and not be limited in your distribution approach, right? You can create things for different platforms. There's a buzzword around ecosystem. You can create an ecosystem of content but you can also put the content out into various ecosystems. Ecosystem doesn't just mean a digital universe with different social apps, right? It means getting into community screenings, getting into town halls, sponsoring panels or being part of panels or applying in panels in different industries. Excuse me. And then and the same thing regarding conversations and opportunities. Opportunities for sure hard to measure, anecdotal at best, but some of those things provide the color, right? That once you receive it, once you get that letter from someone or a personal email from someone telling you, like this More Than Robots campaign that we've got going on at the moment around STEM education for First Robotics, which is an incredible program that 600,000 kids participate in. And it goes all the way from kindergarten to year 12 to through high school. I don't know. I still haven't nailed the nomenclature of the US education system. And we did this campaign for them called I Am More Than, which is available on morethanrobots.org. And I've received some really incredible emails from parents talking about having seen it and what robotics and STEM has done, what STEAM has done for their kids, given them a place of belonging, given them somewhere where they can participate in any way, way, shape, or form. It's not just like the words say, it's not just robots, right? It's there's marketing, there's design, there's all these different elements that unfortunately get lost in the science shuffle sometimes, but it's just a safe place essentially where I know you like this term, where kids can have some psychological safety, where they can explore and play and test and experiment without real judgment. It inspires alignment with other parties. It's like they call it cooperation as opposed to competition. It's just really healthy.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And yeah, I mean, I think that what's happening here is a masterclass in how to measure your impact in the world. And this is what a lot of people don't talk about. And the conversation, part of it, and how many ideas that you go on to inspire, I think, yeah, that is hard to measure, but it's interesting as well, because I agree with you that when you're onto something, you're onto something because so many people just hit you with emails saying, hey, you're onto something. It's like in some ways it's the most subjective, but it's also, quasi-objective, because you're like, hey, no one on this other project, no one was sending me 1,000 emails saying this is so important what you're doing, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to keep those projects and drop the rest.
Yeah. And I think that's indicative of the world at large, is that to generate negative comments on something is fairly easy. To inspire people not to just click a like button, which is fine, but to also write to you. Like, you think about the percentages of people that may have been motivated, but life is busy. To try and take time out to write to someone to let them know that something affected them is a real big yardstick. And if you kind of assume that of 1,000 people watching a video, that 50 of them are going to press like, or 100 of them are going to press the like button. These are just, made up numbers at the minute. But that 1 or 2 will write a comment, or 10 will write a comment and 2 will write to the person who made it, right? And look up something and go further. Then if you look at those metrics of conversions of just comments and communications, you can impute from that a larger data set of people who were inspired by it but didn't take the time to write about it. Mm-hmm. And that's where like intentionality and resources are really essential too, right? Because on that project, on More Than Robots, we had 6+ months of listening to psychologists talk about growth mindset and belonging and all these different kind of issues that kids are facing. And so there was a great deal of research that went into something that looks pretty simple in the end, but had this, grounding and foundation behind it that kind of told us we were on the right path. right? That there was an insight there worth holding on to. And on the flip side, you have other projects like project that, again, I know that you're familiar with, but the My Special Affleck Duck, which was this, social robot.
There it is.
Social robot for kids going through chemotherapy and cancer treatment. And it's an incredible tool. And made by the people at Sproutel. We collaborated with them, with Carol Cohn on Purpose, with Affleck. And there was so much research from different stakeholders that went into it at the front end, and from the kids and their siblings and their parents, like all the different groups. And then at the end of it was also an intentionality to get white papers written, right? To actually see what the impact is of the duck and other quote unquote distraction therapies and other things on the kids' cancer treatment journey. And so if you do have the resources for it, to go through that level of detail where you don't want to just make a difference, but you want to document whether you did or not objectively by a third party, it's pretty unique. It's pretty special.
Absolutely. Before we go too much further, I do want to take an opportunity. You've told us about what you're currently doing. I feel like a lot of people feel that people who disrupt fields work in a single field for a lot of their career. Can you tell everyone, how many degrees do you have? What is your training? Because clearly it's been a very, very linear path for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's like funny. It's like I think about this sometimes and try and find out a way to talk about it. It's like ultimately I feel like I've just said yes whenever someone has approached me with anything that I think is mildly interesting or cool. And I must have massive FOMO or something, right? Like I just need to be part of stuff that is going to be good, or that I feel is going to be worthwhile. And that can be like impactful, but also just aesthetically might just be something that's just beautiful that you just want to be a part of. And I think we all have an attraction to things like that. But some of us are prepared to go outside our comfort zone to pursue it a little further, even if it might have some detrimental effects, maybe financially, for example, in the short term. And you hope it's all going to work out, right, in the long term. Touch wood. And then, but yeah, I have a science degree in pharmacology and toxicology. I have a law degree. Both from Monash University in Melbourne, where I'm from. And then when I came to the US, I went to the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute in New York. So I kind of went backwards. A lot of people go there and then they do law school afterwards. When that doesn't work out, I went the other way. I went to law school.
Take notes, young innovators.
Yeah, and really displeased my parents by going into theatre school after law school. And then did a program in screenwriting at UCLA following that. Also did a leadership program, an innovation fellowship at Kellogg at Northwestern. And as far as academics go, also now like part of the kind of advisory team behind the biodesign program at UCLA, that I pop in and out of just because Jennifer McCaney, who started that program, is a force of nature. And she had gone through the Stanford University biodesign program, decided to start something similar at UCLA where they combine fellows into teams from the Anderson School of Business, the Geffen School of Medicine, and the School of Engineering to work on projects over the course of an academic year that can potentially have great impact in helping communities, usually around med tech, software, hardware. It's pretty fascinating. So staying tangentially related to the academic system a little bit.
Amazing. And I mean, I feel like we've had somewhat similar backgrounds in terms of a lot of people probably looking at our CVs, scratching their heads and thinking, what does this person want to be? And for me, I'm curious to know if it's the same for you, but for me, it was always, what seems useful right now at this moment, and clumping together with some of my other skills, what's going to make me a useful human? Just someone who
Yeah.
can solve problems and do things quite rapidly was always the intention behind everything that I was doing, even if it felt random. Does that?
Oh, that's cool. I don't think it's the same for me. I think that's interesting. So you were conscious of you becoming, by having a physical therapy or a physio background in Australia, that and then going towards neuroscience and those disciplines. You feel an intentionality that you were just becoming a better person to be in service of others.
Yeah, well, I knew, and this is quite funny if you look at the bulk of my work now, saying that I knew where I wanted to go then, because because a lot of the work I do now bears no resemblance to what I wanted to do then. But I knew I wanted to help people with neurological disabilities to get access to better care. That was pretty early on. As a physical therapist or a physiotherapist, depending on where the three people who are listening are located, I thought, I want to help people with stroke and spinal cord injury. I think we can do better than we're currently doing. I'm going to get into the space. Then I realized I didn't know any, we got 2 years of neurophysiology training in school, which is more than most places give.
Yeah.
But I was like, it just scratched the surface. So, okay, let's do a PhD in basic neurophysiology. Then I started to realize, okay, I need a computational background, because otherwise it's going to be a mess. Jump over to America. Okay, I need to do experiment. I need to learn engineering skills and do experimental work that involves engineering and building electrodes and all these sorts of things. Jumped around a little bit.
Yeah.
But each time it's been, I've done two things. I've made the decision of, do I need to be an expert in this, or do I need to just learn the language and then move on? Because, for instance, this, working with biostatisticians, I pretty quickly came to the determination, I don't need to learn all this math. What I need to be able to do is have a smart, an intelligent conversation with a biostatistician where I can explain my point of view in his or her language. That's the skill that I needed. And so as soon as I got that skill, I jumped ship, because I was like, I don't need to. I don't know. I've done enough linear algebra. I don't need to do anything.
That's really cool.
But
no,
that was
it really sounds like a toolkit approach. Almost, right?
Totally a toolkit approach. I just
really cool. I don't think it's the same for me. I think mine is more, in a way, selfish, but also leads you to be in better service of others. But I think it's more curiosity driven, right? Yours seems to be a little bit more strategic in terms of what you need. Maybe you had a clearer vision for, like you were saying about neurophysiology and stroke and rehab, like that there was a forward thinking there. For me,
I would say tumbling down the rabbit hole rather than forward thinking, because starting at the PT side, I was like, I don't know what I need. But as I started to unravel the problem, I was like, I need these skills and these skills and these skills for sure.
I think my rabbit hole in diving was like, that's really interesting. I can't let go of that. That's really interesting. I can't let go of that. That's really interesting. I have to say yes, even while I'm still doing this over here. So, and that to me was always like, people used to joke, even when I lived in Australia, that there was no such thing as downtime. Like, people would go, what do you, like, that was a buzzword back then. It was like, what do you do in your downtime? And then someone else would love, Elliot doesn't have any downtime, because I was just obsessed with, to the point of not sleeping straight, obsessed with reading things, watching things, looking at things, speaking to people, interviewing people, gathering data about them, or gathering research on them before I spoke to them, knowing all I could know so that I got to a place that I thought that they hadn't got to before if someone else had interviewed them previously. I was really obsessed with with finding out information from people who were passionate about the things that they were working on. And you know, it was a real driving force. Like I felt a sense of like contagion, you know, like I almost like every person I spoke to in depth whose work I respected, or whose personality I got to know. You know, there's almost like a philosophy where you're kind of falling in love with them because you're so entrenched in the conversation. But what you're in love with is the energy, right? The knowledge exchange, the dynamic of finding out what really makes someone tick, what they really care about. And so for me, I think having the toolkit was almost accidental, but super beneficial if in that 2020 hindsight way of like saying, oh, wow, I have, you know, studied psychology and pharmacology and toxicology, and that gives me an ability to converse and have discourse with people who have that language, like you're saying, right? And then because I'm looking to create plays and screenplays and journalistic pieces for magazines and screen and television and other things on this side, I need to make sure that the person who is receiving that information can understand it. So there's some sort of translational aspect, right, to borrow a medical term, or some sort of adaptation that happens where you are taking something that usually one set of speakers understands, they have that language, and you're translating it for different groups and making it accessible and available. And you don't realize you have that skill until after, you know, when stuff has been successful, you can look back, right? It's like a bit egotistical to think that that's your discipline, but when you look back and over time, it's like, oh wow, yeah, I really think that that's what I do, is like I can take some really, you know, interesting, novel, complex kind of scientific or other ideas and bring them back to a level that we can all access in some way, and hopefully different people can access it in different ways and get what they need out of it. But hopefully that all serves to inspire something a little better, or create impact for something a little bit better than it was yesterday.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really, really admire about the work that you do, about everything that you do, and I aspire to it, in fact, is I've always really loved the fact that despite all the hard work that you're doing, all the incredible projects, I mean, you've named 2 projects, but you've done a million projects that have all, in my opinion, had the, you know, a very intentional and noticeable impact on the field that you're trying to impact, but you never make yourself the story. And to come back to your earlier formula about, you know, impact being an idea plus empathy, we should probably throw intention in there as well, because I think that, again, to sort of come back to science, like a lot of people want to write their names on things. And I'm often, you know, constantly find myself saying to people, I don't care who discovers this or who puts their name on this, so long as the work gets done.
Yeah.
That's a very rare sentiment in science. Is it as rare in documentary film? You know, I feel like it might be.
I don't know about documentary film. I think documentary film is like usually a subset of people with better intentions, right?
Yeah.
Documentary obviously now has become like a much broader group, like, you know, true crime and all these other things that are super successful, and sports docs, which are a subset of, you know, obviously a subset that are more driven by higher entertainment value. You know, there are other things that, you know, people might be, and you know, there's a knowledge too that if you can build your own brand, so to speak, that you are more likely to, you know, build a business in this environment where we celebrate, you know, celebrity. I think it really depends on the comfort zone of the person, but yeah, I think it's rare as a general rule amongst people who are willing to take a backseat sometimes to let a message shine. Now, not to say I don't have a healthy ego. When I get the recognition, I really do enjoy it. Like I do get a dopamine hit
Yeah.
when someone calls you out and says you've done a good job. But yeah, sometimes maybe even sabotage yourself on the road to not wanting to put yourself in the center of it. And, quite frankly, I kind of wish that I did. I was more ego driven. I think it would then give me more opportunities to talk about the work. But there are some things now where I just feel a sense of urgency, especially around some different issues that I probably would not normally tackle had people not come to me. They're not things that I would have sought out on my own. Like I did a piece with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar last year about trailblazing Black athletes and the impact they had on him. Now, there's no reason people should come to me for that. But as a kid who grew up with a aspirational quality around basketball and especially the Lakers, and had posters of Magic on my wall and Kareem on my sister's and all that sort of stuff on my sister's walls, like I couldn't turn down that opportunity. And I also knew I'd be a good steward of it. And not just in terms of telling the story, because obviously, yes, there's probably some people who have like more of a personal history that could have had some other insights, but I knew that I would assemble a team around it that were diverse and reflective of society, and that he would feel comfortable, and that I would approach it with a humility as much as possible, despite any potential backlash later on that, why are you doing this? Well, this is what I do. And I think I have something to add here, but I also think that I bring enough people around me to make sure that I'm not operating in a silo of ego that thinks that I can, tell this story myself. And so you just have to take that collaborative approach. Similarly on Black Boys, right? Like they're on all the articles, all the Q&As, those sorts of things on a film that came out as an NBC Peacock original. Like I'm way in the background. Like I'm not appearing in any press to do with that. But that's just the role of being, for want of a better term, a good ally with regard to social justice, or similarly with Little Miss Sumo around gender equity, with our hero Hiyori Kon, who wanted to become the first professional female sumo wrestler in Japan, a national sport in which 50% of the population is forbidden from participating at a professional level. And again, like I'm not front and center on it, nor should I be. But it's just something I wanted to make sure happened, that could be supported, got through. We have a film coming out about an affordable housing crisis in 2023 in April, May. And it's just like there are issues out there that you just want to talk about. You want to ensure that people have a voice. And if I can use some of my toolkit to ensure that they get centered and have those opportunities, and can somehow help, lead them to that place and give them some sort of way to translate so that people hear it in a certain way and maybe change some behavior, then that's all good.
Amazing. And I mean, I think everything that you just touched on just now is something that is so far from the sort of radar of most scientists and most people trying to create healthcare innovation, and yet it's so important for impact. The idea of community co-design for a solution, the idea of involving the community in every aspect of design, when you're designing an experiment, building a technology, this is often lost. I can't tell you, I sit through a lot of health technology pitches, and I can't tell you how often it starts with a very healthy looking CEO telling you that their grandmother had a stroke and they observed one struggle, and now they're out there crusading to solve the problem. And I'm like, okay, well, other than your grandmother, who else did you ask if this was a problem? And, how many other people with stroke are in your community, and how many people are actively a part of your product and your company and your, and time and time again, I see it just stop an innovation in its tracks because they were solving a problem that no one in the community asked for, and they didn't really have any business solving other than that they're a tech bro from San Francisco, and they witnessed a hardship in a family member.
Yeah. I think like there's two problems there, right? One is that there's a formulaic approach to pitching that someone had that they're copying, right? And make it personal and then tell people about it, like what that motivating force was, what that founder's story is. But I think your point as well is like there's nothing wrong with being motivated by a single story, right? But like as you're saying, but it's like what you then do to authentically pursue a field, right? Impact in a field. And a field is always more than one person, right? It's multiple stakeholders. And you really need to do that in order to, like, it's just market research, right? Like a lot of the NIH grants and other kind of, there are some Science Federation NSF grants, I think, that really reward that market research being done. How many stakeholders have you talked to up and down the field, supply chain, consumers, patients, the nurses and nursing staff who might actually be the ones connecting the device from its presence in the hospital to the patient and what they're seeing. Like I think there are some programs that really that do that well. But yeah, I totally agree. There's a formulaic approach that I think is a little bit busted because there was so much money in the space for a while that you just kind of followed what worked. And that led to that tech bro-ish mentality. And then there's that ego too, that you're solving a problem without really having spent time in the community. That's why they should watch more Family Feud or something. Survey the top 100 answers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and to the point of how decisions get made, let's talk about the fact that until recently and still very, very infrequently do we see people with lived experience actually sitting on NIH study sections to decide who gets funding for their disease. So where we've got $30 billion of federal taxpayer money being spent to solve stroke and spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury, and I'm focusing on the neuro ones, but everything.
Yeah.
And we have very, very rarely do we have people who actually have lived experience of the disease sitting in on these sessions and saying, this is an important problem for me, or this is not an important problem for me. I had a really great experience at an international Parkinson's disease conference where it was basically 1/3 patients or people with Parkinson's, 1/3 researchers, 1/3 clinicians. And the conversations, these intersectional conversations that were happening in this conference where patients were standing up in the middle of a talk saying, we don't care about this symptom. Like, find a new thing to work on because like this is not an inconvenience to our lives. Help us with tremor, help us with getting off the toilet, it was really,
that's amazing.
I'm being honest, but it was also,
I don't know how many anecdotes start with, I had this great experience at a Parkinson's conference.
Yeah, not many. Yeah.
But I think that's right. That word that you use there, which I haven't used in a long time, but that is so apt, is intersectionality. And, I think that there's like the people who founded the I Am ALS movement, they were politicians who the husband was then diagnosed with ALS.
Yeah.
And then he testified to Congress and went around to the politicians to drum up support. Now, if he had not had that intersectionality, they wouldn't have gotten that bill passed that assured extra funding coming into the ALS movement. And I think their name is Steve and Sandra, but I could be wrong. But
that sounds right to me as well. Yeah.
But they're pretty incredible. But you're right. Like, it's people who are at those intersectionalities. It's kind of like you talking about your certain toolkit, me talking about the access that I'm able to have across, media and science, and then, but as a gift, other things as well. But I think that's right. I think that takes those people who have that intersectionality, like as you know, because you were a star on the first episode of it, was Innovation Squared, which we did during COVID, funded by Amgen. And it was this idea that people who work on a molecular level don't often get to talk with people who are working on innovation on an external, more engineering-driven level. And that during COVID, we were in these Zoom calls running through agenda where we would just be hitting things off and taking things off a list of things to do, and then jumping on another Zoom call and running through another agenda. But what we were missing were those in-between moments where we met people outside of our direct circle of influence or our direct team, right? And with our direct team, we are of like minds to some extent in the work, and we don't know what we don't know, and we're working towards innovation, but it's probably incremental. But if we're forced to have a conversation with someone, even within the same company, who works in a different section, but certainly with people outside, like if you're talking to relatives, etc., when you're talking about what you do as in terms of research, you have to do it to talk about it in a way that's relatable. And when you do that, you give them the opportunity to come up with free associations to other things in other industries that they can offer back to you as an observation that might then unlock something for you, or enable you to look across to the gaming industry and borrow that tool that they've got and they've spent decades working on, or the social media industry where they've kind of laser focused into how to get behavior changed, so that you focus on something more and longer, and you can borrow that a little bit. And I think that that's where we get that intersectionality, where we have those opportunities to have cross-industry conversations, is where we can really, more often even have these giant leaps of innovation, because we are breaking through our silo, looking at these other things that are happening in the world, where people have worked really hard on these things and have absolute dominance in a certain field, but it's being used for a completely different purpose. So we just need to be kind of kept open to those experiences and have those conversations across groups, to the patients, and hearing what they work with, what they like working with, what tools they like using that might be completely unrelated to the ones that you're using to treat them, but maybe you can integrate them somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I also think it's probably worth a shout out to some, a newer community that I've been working with, which is the, complex chronic illness community, long COVID, myalgic encephalomyelitis, Lyme disease, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, these sorts of conditions, which, well, used to be rare, and now post-viral illness certainly is not a rare disease anymore. It's affecting a large proportion of the US population. But it's for the longest time not been anyone's problem in mainstream healthcare. So interestingly, when I speak to this patient population, I go to them for scientific ideas, because they're reading widely. They're reading everything. This community has already adopted the posture of, no one is going to help me. Help is not coming. I'm going to help myself. And so they're reading everything from, metabolic and mitochondrial dysfunction all the way through to, what's happening with these new microclots that could be circulating in the body, and viral persistence and virology and stuff that I have no experience with. And the way that information is being is being communicated has really, it's turned on its head. Suddenly they're the experts who I'm like, hang on, start slower, use smaller words, and work me through it.
I love that.
And it's been it's been a great experience for me because I love learning. It's been a humbling experience because there's so much to upskill on in such a short amount of time. But it's been a very singular and unique.
There's a person who I admire greatly. Her name's Katja Moritz. She's a doctor. She's based in Florida, originally from South America. And she has had an illness that was either not diagnosed or misdiagnosed for a very, very long time, and set about creating a documentary about people who are undiagnosed. What she said to me that really resonated is that if you don't have a diagnosis, the worst thing that can happen to you is that you die without having any revelation, without anyone pinpointing it, because then all the testing, all the data, all the different things that you've tried all amount to zero, because there was never any crystallization of that information around a result. And so all the things you put yourself through to try and get ahead or to try and get back to quote unquote normal are not, that all those data sets are not worth anything, right? And so so it was really kind of a thing where it's like you want to feel a sense of belonging, right? It's like, and you want answers, but not just for yourself if you're feeling, magnanimous and altruistic, but like I think that you need answers in order to process, but you also need answers so that you feel like all the things that lead up to it were of value. And it is that these undiagnosed communities who are willing to go the extra mile and provide whatever data needs to be provided. And I think that that's a problem with with tech at the moment, consumer-facing technology at the moment, in terms of all these sensors and things, that glucose monitors and all these different things that we're wearing. It's generally, in terms of data sets, what we're receiving the very healthy who want to know everything and optimize everything and focused on longevity and being their best selves and all this sort of stuff. We're seeing the fit CEO syndrome at the minute, right? With Bezos and all these guys who are super jacked, right?
Well,
and what's that in yourself? And everyone over at the Mount Sinai office for sure. And then you're seeing the people who are on the other end of the spectrum who are going through some very real things, are feeling suffering, and are just willing to give their data so that they can get answers. But it's this middle group that we're missing, the everyday people, right? And it's similar with neuroscience, I imagine, is that oftentimes you're looking at brain. And when I talked to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's even though he's on CNN, he's still a practicing neurosurgeon at Grady in Atlanta. He was saying this, is that oftentimes, like, our neuroscience comes from diseased brains and brains in trauma. And like, the good thing about what's happened in the last 20 years with MRIs and other things is that we've been able to study healthy brains to some extent. And that's a new thing that people don't appreciate. Like, how can we optimize healthy brains and what they're doing? How do we make them healthy when we don't have no kind of baseline for what a healthy brain is, if we're only dealing with trauma or disease, right? And that often happens from a funding perspective too. It only comes in when there's some sort of catastrophic event, the funding pours in. But on the regular day-to-day, when we could be doing something and really investing in something heavily, we don't have the same motivation.
Yeah.
You find that to be true?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much nuance in what is healthy. When you feed something like this into a capitalism model, the main issue is that, like, you need everyone to have one definition of healthy, right? So, if you're selling Whoop bands, and you're telling people when to exercise and when to sleep, you're not making any room for the fact that someone might have myalgic encephalomyelitis or long COVID. And when you tell them to exercise, that is akin to telling them to drink a quart of alcohol. Like, you're going to damage them and poison them by exercising rather than actually, optimize what they're doing. And I think that our current lens of medicine, we're really adequate at dealing with the big things. Someone has a stroke, something you can see on an MRI, we know what to do. Someone has a heart attack, we know what to do. Someone has a more subtle illness, so they don't have a giant lesion on their MRI, but they're neurodivergent in some way, whether that be they can't tolerate cognitive exertion without triggering a lot of post-exertional symptoms, or they have an autism spectrum disorder, or they're simply incredibly introverted, such that social interaction makes them very, very drained.
Yeah.
These are all different, forms of normal and healthy, just on a different spectrum. But we've got one wearable that's saying, get up, get on the treadmill, do this, do that, go to sleep. And it works for a subset of the population and nobody else. But we're like, this is what wellness looks like. And we get enraged when someone like Lizzo says, hey, this isn't necessarily what wellness looks like. She's like, I have the body shape that I have, but I can outdance all of you,
Yeah.
And yet the rage and the backlash that she sparks when she says things like that, how dare this person who doesn't conform to what we think healthy looks like state that she is healthy? How dare she,
Yeah.
This is a big reckoning that we need to get to in healthcare and health technology, this understanding of nuance, this understanding of this understanding also of the fact that for the longest time, all of these experiments that ingest a whole bunch of data from electronic health records and tell us what the standards are, these are one side of the story only. You only get what the clinician wrote down.
Super skewed.
And second, because we're in America and because America, has the history that it has, these data sets are racist, sexist, and ableist. There is, this isn't an opinion of mine. This is a fact. There has been no shortage of really beautifully conducted, peer-reviewed trials showing that when you take EHR data and train an AI, to be a doctor, that doctor is racist, sexist, and ableist.
I think, that, AI unleashed, we've seen it a few times, even, on Twitter and other things, as a collection. When something is collecting language that is made public, again, you've got to think that the people who are most likely to give public opinion on something are people who are screaming about something, right? Exactly. On either side, screaming on the woke side, screaming on the racist side, but they're screaming, right? And again, it's the people in the middle who are missing out. I remember like Jon Stewart saying, in this polemical world where you've got two people who are kind of just screaming to be heard just for the sake of being heard a lot of the time, right? Sometimes their position has been defined by an ability to be heard or an ability to be seen or a desire to be seen, right? As opposed to what they truly even believe in sometimes. And he's like, we need all the moderates of the world to get up and start screaming. Now, this is counterintuitive, right? But you're not gonna have that reckoning without it. But it's like in this sort of world, right, where we feed into these, certainly in our media bubbles. But we've heard about that enough over the last 4 years. But it's like it really just needs to be like these media bubbles generated where we are finding those commonalities, where we are celebrating the humanity of us all, that it's not, these artificially constructed narratives of like who belongs on what side of what line and defines a whole bunch of different metrics for us. But it does need to move into that more personalized realm, right? And that's going to be hard, and from a resource standpoint, going to be really taxing. But we need to invest in it in order to serve people, right? It needs to move towards like sometimes maybe even personalized storytelling, but I'm sure on the medicine side, there needs to be some sort of reckoning with the fact that the more we know about people, the more we know how different everyone is along a spectrum, and that there are going to just need to be a lot more customizable options or combinations of options that some group of people is taking the time to assess and to then stick with. I remember hearing about people checking in Japan like 20, 30 years ago to have an assessment every year around their health. Like that was, to me, was like almost like revolutionary. We are in a world in the US a lot of the time, and certain other countries, where you only see medical professionals if you're really, really, really sick, right? And it's just not feasible to develop a healthy culture if we have those reward systems in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming up on time. I think, as we've proven many, many, many times before, we could talk forever if we were given the option. So I think to finish up, I always hate when people ask other people to rank their most impactful or their most, so I'm not going to ask you to rank your
Okay,
most
you're not going to do it. I thought you were prefacing the fact that you hate it, and then you're going to ask me to do it.
I would never. But I would ask it, for the sort of final message as we walk out. When you think back on some of the projects that have been the most impactful, what are the things that stick out, for projects that really moved the needle on a field or were important? And I know that you've had a lot. What are the sort of common things that really jump out at you about the feeling that you got as the project was taking place, and what made it feel special in the moment, that you knew it was going to be an impactful project?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, which is just me buying time, because it is a good question, but I think that but it's also me buying time to think about it, because I haven't reflected on that synthesis of what it makes me feel, right? And I think a lot of times I love when someone who has gone unnoticed or uncelebrated is then held up as a source of really valuable information, or a real valuable story that you can relate to, be inspired by, etc. And I think that at the moment we've got this documentary out called For Tomorrow, that we worked with Sid Lee on. It's a project that was started by Hyundai Motor Company and the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, getting together to celebrate grassroots innovation, which means that the people who are closest to problems are the ones coming up with the solutions for them. And often they're less formally educated than what we typically consider to be a source for innovation, right? They don't come from a massive institution academically, big tech company, etc. They don't have those resources. But what they have is local knowledge and a will to do something about it. And I think that is across different things, whether it's My Special Affleck Duck, having the will to create something for the kids going through it, as opposed to things that Affleck had done before, which were also awesome, but they were sponsoring professor chairs and research and other things. But they wanted to do something that was for the kids. And it was like they had a legacy in the space of investing in childhood cancer, and to then underwrite it and be prepared to go through that process was incredible. And to be part of that team, watching these kids give feedback on the duck that they wanted it to purr like a kitten, right? That's an insight that you would not get from any other stakeholder. So the duck does purr like a kitten. It has a vibrational
pure chaos, and
that is so beautiful, right? The fact that our For Tomorrow program, Hyundai have BTS, the K-pop group, as ambassadors. I managed to bring in Daisy Ridley from the Star Wars universe to narrate the film, but all in service of providing access, generating interest, so that people pick up the story, whether in its full documentary form or in trailer form or whatever, just to get to know some of these innovators. Because there's one guy, Anil Gupta, who's the head of something called the Honeybee Network, that has documented like 1 million micro innovations. And he says, minds on the margin are not marginal minds. And I love that. And it's super reflective of what I kind of have this process of discovery when we're going through these stories and finding people to interview and talk to about things. But essentially what you're doing is you're providing a lens to people who just have the will to do something. And I think that to me is super exciting. It's like, because it's universal. We don't have to be part of some massive academic institution. Oftentimes we do feel overwhelmed by all the issues that are going on in the world and think that we don't have a place in the world to solve them personally. But there are all these opportunities for us to collaborate, for us to align, for us to state what we're interested in and then be connected to others. Right? It comes back to, like I said, I guess essentially this kind of 4 Ps thing that we formulated, or that I formulated, which is that if you have a passion around something and can apply it, then that application is your purpose, right? Purpose is that applied passion towards something. But if you tell people about your purpose, if you tell people about the thing that you're working on, right, via social media, via just family members, then they'll generate activity that then brings people towards you who want to do the same thing. And with them, anything is possible, right? So passion leads to purpose, leads to people, leads to possibility. And I just truly believe that to be always true. Is that you just need to generate that will, that desire to have an impact, to have an effect, to have a solution, to have an insight, to have a little piece of knowledge, to have a curiosity. And that then takes care of a whole bunch of other things. It's this massive snowball effect. And so any project that has that revelation where it's like, oh, we didn't need all this stuff in order to generate something super meaningful. Yes, we do sometimes, right? Like high-end medicine, precision medicine, etc. Yes, you need those things to come together. But you can have an impact even on those things without being educated in that field, by providing insights, like you're saying, from the patient population, from the data sets, from being a different stakeholder. So there's always some room for you. There's somewhere for you to play. There's something for you to get interested in, to follow, to pursue. There's no limitation other than your own will. And if we can only inspire people to check in on their purpose once in a while, like we do with their diet and their exercise, rather than focus on the behavior, focus on the motivator, right? And once you have that purpose, the behavior will come with it, because you'll be so energized by that maybe you're not eating throughout the day. You're only eating at key intervals or to fuel what you're doing. Right? You might still have preferences for fried chicken like I do, but in the general sense, you're trying to stay healthy in order to achieve your objectives, right? And the same with exercise. If you've got a purpose, you're much more likely to get up and move and get things done, right? And so find those places of community, those places of belonging, find those places of interest and pursue them. But we all need to be asking each other a little bit more about, where we're finding a sense of purpose or a sense of engagement.
I love it. Wow, what a way to end. That's I don't think I've ever heard it stated so clearly how to be an innovator, how to really understand if you're on the right track or not, because it is a very very hard thing to navigate. But the 4 Ps and minds on the margins are not marginal minds. I think that is what every academic health system needs to understand. And I think that frequently, to your caveats of, the understanding that sometimes you do need billions of dollars in precision medicine. I wish more people understood that is fine, but there shouldn't be such an imbalance between how much money we put into these highly precise, cold, incremental innovation science ventures versus these disruptive, passion-forward, purpose-forward ventures. And I love the way you framed that for the end of our chat, and this has been great. Always an honor and a pleasure and a learning experience chatting with you, Elliot. So thank you.
The feeling is truly mutual. Thanks, Dave.
This is Disrupting Innovation with Dr. David Petrino.